young supporters, usually for people under the age of 30. We're going to be speaking to those who are running these groups. So good morning to Andrea Campos, a member of Young Labour. Good morning.
Good morning.
Also Alexandra Patterson, the national chairman of the group Conservatives Future. Hello.
Hello there, good morning.
Hello, morning. Tom Pashby is the campaigns officer for Young Greens. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
And Joe Jenkins is the chair of Young Independents, the youth section of UKIP. Hello to you.
Hello.
Right, where to begin? There's so much we could talk about, but let's talk about, I suppose, start off by talking about young people and voting. Do you believe, looking at the stats, looking at the fact that 6 out of 10 young voters turned out to vote in the last general election, do you think we're seeing a shift, a change to more young people engaging in politics? Andrea?
I think we are. I mean, you know, we have a very politicised generation who have seen so many changes occur around them, whether that be to their curriculums at school, how their schools are structured, changes to their GCSEs, their A-levels, and also to the people who were able to vote at the election. They were the first generation of people who had £9,000 tuition fees and who are now, also, you know, and who saw the prospect that under a Tory government, those were going to be, you know, the cap on tuition fees was going to be scrapped. So, yeah, I think, you know, more young people are getting involved, and we should definitely use that to try and inspire more young people to get involved.
And Alexandra, do you think the messages were kind of connecting with young people? Those messages from not just your party, the Conservatives, but all the political parties, were they really touching on what young people were talking about and engaged with?
I think they were, particularly around the election. The messages of the apprentices that the Conservatives created were under about 2.2 million. We've commissioned 3 million more. We were working with an organisation called Bite the Ballot, which aims to increase youth engagement in politics. They created like an app which sort of looks at what's a political party which you're going to. We've also seen recently with the A-level results, the number of students from disadvantaged backgrounds attending university has risen by 4% since last year. And compared to Labour, you don't have to pay a penny back towards your student loan until you earn 21,000. Under Labour is 18. So we're really seeing a lot of young people being very, very receptive to our messaging. Yeah.
So Tom, those treatments around education, engaging, Alexandra says, for young people. What about your party and the messages your party were putting across, specifically that he did engage young people?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Andrea, to be honest, because young people have been completely politicised by austerity, and young people are getting increasingly involved. Our membership has gone up from 2,000 to 20,000 in the space of a year. And we've seen this across Europe and across the political parties, I believe, especially on the left. But there's still far more work to do, and 6 out of 10 is not good enough. We need to increase it from that.
And Joe, UKIP, what are young people who are involved with UKIP, involved with Young Independents, telling you that is interesting for them, is engaging for them?
Well, you know, they're looking at stuff like STEM subjects. They're looking at being able to have jobs at the end of when they leave university. Unfortunately, what we've had created is, under Labour, we had a 50% target introduced by Tony Blair, which has unfortunately saturated the graduate job market for students. So what they're doing is they're coming out, they're highly overqualified for the jobs that they're being able to be given. And they also don't, you know, they've had to be burdened with an absolute massive amount of debt. Now, this is something that's not acceptable. We also have not got houses for these young people when they're coming out. So this fantasy land that they've been played off with is go to university, get yourself a graduate job, get yourself a nice house. Unfortunately, we do not have any of this, and we need to really readdress this and change this for young people.
Is votes for 16-year-olds the way forward then, Joe?
No, actually, I don't think it is. I think, unfortunately, as 16 years old, you are still very susceptible to peer groups and unfortunately don't have quite the right life experience yet that's being given. I mean, I do understand the argument, you know, the age of consent is 16-year-old for a number of things, but actually what I think it is they've been given the opportunity to start to progress to adulthood. You know, parents still have an absolute overriding say on what they do. You know, you can join the military and you can get married, but unfortunately you can only do this, you know, with the parents' consent, because it is seen that unfortunately at 16 years old you are not able to make these life-changing decisions yourself, and it's a huge responsibility voting. I mean, when I was 16 years old, I was a Liberal Democrat for my sins. And I find this, I certainly was not of the same sort of political mind that I am today. And in fact, I think I was massively swayed by my peer group because it was sort of the acceptable, cool face to be. And when you start to really understand and address the issues that really, affect this country and make a difference, this is why I am against, 16-year-old votes. No.
How old are you now, Joe?
22.
Oh, you're really grown up now.
Oh, yeah, it's getting so old.
So, Andrea, 16 years old, Joe says you don't have the maturity, really. You don't have the single-mindedness, the independent-mindedness to make your own mind up.
I think that argument is really condescending and it really undermines the intelligence of 16-year-olds across this country. At the age of 16, we actually ask, these young people to make decisions as to whether they're going to pursue A-levels, whether they're going to pursue an apprenticeship or any other career. If they can decide their future at 16, they can definitely decide a government. I would also say that if we introduce votes at 16, we would also be far more likely to increase citizenship education in schools, which at the moment is fairly appalling. And, they're not stupid. They know what's going on around them. They can see the changes. And until 16-year-olds are able to vote, we won't have politicians making laws and introducing things in manifestos which will actually appeal to young people. And, one thing I did admire about the Labour Party in the last election was the fact that we had a young person's manifesto, we had consultations on them, and we had young people having a really good input into the policy process, and they were very keen to do that. And, I think that goes to show the fact that young people are very engaged and they should have a right to vote.
Tom, you said that you've had a huge increase in the number of people who've joined your Young Greens movement. What sort of ages are they, and how do you feel about the 16-year-old voting?
Huge range of ages, actually. I mean, I know last year in the 2014 European elections, there was a Young Green activist who is 16, but she basically led the campaign in the Southwest for Young Greens, and it was just absolutely terrible that she couldn't vote because she clearly was very educated around politics, and young people are constantly exposed to news, so I think they're capable of making up their own minds, unlike what Joe says. Also, Votes of 16 is a major campaign for the Young Greens in the run-up to the European referendum. So, yeah, we do take it very seriously.
And Alexandra, your view on this?
On votes for 16s?
Yeah.
Well, Conservative Party, we welcome the debate on this issue. We think that voting is a privilege and a right, something that all people should get involved in, and one you should get at 18. What I think is important is not to confuse voting with engagement. People, some of my members, particularly around the general election, are under 18, made a massive contribution to the general election campaign through social media, being out on the doorstep. So it doesn't mean that just because you're not voting doesn't mean you're not interested in politics. And Conservative Future is the largest youth political organisation in Europe, I think, some 15,000 members. So we're definitely not, lacking in young people getting involved in the party.
But you don't believe that until somebody's 18 they should vote?
For me, I saw my 18th birthday as sort of a rite of passage, and I really enjoyed that being my time to vote. But again, this is a debate we welcome and I'm sure will be looked at in the future.
OK, let's move on and talk about some of the issues that affect young people. Do you know what? There was on a slightly different tack, there was a really bit of interesting research that came out yesterday, and it's from the Girl Guiding Association, or forgive me, it might have been Monday, but it was talking about issues surrounding young girls and what they were really concerned about for their futures, girls between the age of 13 and 20. And they first of all asked parents, what are you concerned about for your daughters at this age? And they were talking about drug use, alcohol use, sexual behaviour, teenage pregnancy. And actually, when they talked to the young women themselves, the young women said, actually, those things we're not really that fearful about. What we're really concerned about are mental health issues, particularly around self-harming. And it just starts to show about this disconnect between adults, in inverted commas, and young people. Do you think political parties are really starting to bridge this gap, to understand this disconnect, really, between generations? And let me start with you, Andrea.
I think they are. And I think, political party, especially the Labour Party, was definitely engaged with what young people wanted. Like I said, we had massive consultations up and down the countries, both within Young Labour and Labour students, where young people got to meet shadow ministers and sort of say to them, this is what we want. We also had the Shape Your Future initiative, whereby MPs went to Labour clubs all around the country, led by Lisa and Andy, and said this is what we want in a Labour manifesto for young people.
And what were those key aspects?
So, young people were worried about the NHS, they were worried about housing, they were worried about education and changes to their tuition fees. And through that, we had a pledge to lower tuition fees to £6,000. They were also worried about young people's access to mental health issues. The Labour Party had a commitment to increase funding to that. And young people are so engaged in the issues around them, and I think it's really important that parties have initiatives to ensure that they are in touch with what young people need.
Housing, education and the NHS, Joe, is what Andrea says. She was finding out that research there. What about people who talk to you, UKIP?
Well, I do have to agree, actually. They are three areas which are consistently brought up. I mean, housing is a massive one. We have got a huge shortage of housing at the moment for young people.
And affordable housing.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I mean, I'm currently trying to rent a place, and for goodness sake, it costs me a month's wages just to, pay the agent's fees.
And where do you live?
The deposits. Dorking,
right,
at the moment. And it's incredible. What we need to do is people don't like to talk about it, but unfortunately immigration does play a massive part in this, because once you've got the influx of immigration, social housing is strained already at the moment, and we need to really start to cap this. But we also have stuff like STEM subjects. I mean, when we're talking about education...
What's a STEM subject?
Well, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. This is, Andrea's alluded to a 6,000 pledge. We've pledged to give them for free, because what they are, they have been said even by James Dyson himself, one of Britain's, best known businessman, has said that these are lacking in lacking in these skills.
Where are the next generation of engineers going to come from?
Yes, that's it. You've got the quote exactly. What we need to do is we need to incentivize people to do these jobs so that we do not need to bring them in. Let's stimulate the young people to actually get out there and do something. There is also the issues of democracy as well. I think young people are really starting to engage in this idea of, where their vote is going, what sort of say they have, who is governing them. And I think this is another issue, that is being brought up, and I hope it will become massively relevant and brought to light.
Issues around the voting system?
Both, yes. The voting system, certainly. I think, you look at the 4 million votes that UKIP attained at the general election, and I think it's an abhorrent injustice to only return one MP. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have one Douglas Carswell over 100 Labour MPs, but it is something substantial. But we've also got the European Union. We have to start to question where we're actually being governed from.
Are young people really coming to you, Joe, and saying we're concerned about our membership of the European Union?
Massively.
They are?
Yes. Well, I mean, I do lead a Eurosceptic youth wing, so maybe in some ways that clouds it, but it is certainly something that when we're on the doors and when we're talking to people, they really are massively concerned. Because if you do not understand where your power, where your laws and your responsibility and who you are actually truly answering to, you cannot hope to actually make a vote or even to live in a democratic country. And we need to address this now.
Alexandra, let me just put this question to you. We've heard there about issues that have been brought to Joe, they've been brought to Andrea. What about young people who've been talking to you? What are they really concerned about? Is there anything new?
I think basically what young people want to do, want to feel that they are being listened to, that their voices matter, that what they're saying is in any way going towards decision making, and the Conservative Party it is. We're doing a massive review of the party at the moment, and Conservative Future and all the young members are having an opportunity to talk about what they want to see in the party. So
there was just let me put this to you, because there was some criticism of the last budget being sort of an anti-young person's budget. What do the young people involved with the Conservative Party say about that? What's their rebuttal to that?
Well, I mean, look at youth unemployment. It rose under Labour by 45% and then decreased dramatically under the coalition, will continue to go down. We had 2.2 million apprenticeships. We're going to do more for that. And also looking at encouraging more students from disadvantaged backgrounds to go to university, which we are actually achieving rather than just promising and not delivering. So I wouldn't agree with that at all.
OK, Tom, anything that the member of the Green Party, the young people members of the Green Party organisations have said to you is affecting them that hasn't been mentioned so far outside of housing and education and the NHS in Europe?
I'd certainly say they haven't been asking me about immigration, because that's a ridiculous thing to bring up in this subject. I would say that the current government's attacks on young people, like with the threats to withdraw job seekers allowance to under 21s or 25s, can't remember the figure. But yeah, it's hugely concerning and not a surprise, unfortunately.
Any other issues?
Those are the top ones, I'd say, but also
Okay.
climate change, because clearly it's our futures and people aren't taking responsibility, specifically our government and the international community.
Okay. There's one last subject I want to talk about. It's a subject we've been discussing a few moments ago here on 5 Live. And this is the notion of women's only carriages on public transport, suggested to go as a consultation by Jeremy Corbyn yesterday. Nicky Morgan has also said she doesn't believe it would be a positive move. How do you feel about it? How do you think young people have talked to you about this, Andrea?
I've had sort of a mixture of results. The thing is, you can have women-only carriages, but that in itself isn't going to tackle the culture of men harassing women on public transport. It's saying if you don't want to be harassed, go somewhere else, rather than saying don't harass women.
Is it something you've been subject to?
Yeah, I have actually. It's really uncomfortable, when you have strange men deciding to put their hands in places where they shouldn't be, and just thinking that they're entitled to press themselves up against you. It's very uncomfortable, but, rather than, saying I'm going to leave my carriage, rather than saying I have to make my commute to work harder, I just turn around and I call them out and I just say, what you're doing is disgusting. Like, please leave me alone. And I think we should really invite a bigger culture of calling people out on things like that. And if you see it happening, you should also call it out, because sometimes it can be intimidating and women can find it hard to sort of say, please don't do that. It's scary if you're a woman and you have a man doing that to you. And I think we should really move more towards promoting, like, you calling out sexual harassment anywhere.
Do you think it's a woman's responsibility to stand up and say, this is happening to me right now?
It's not just women's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility to recognise the fact that this happens and sort of say this shouldn't happen and create a greater tackling culture. It's not an onus that should just fall on women, it's an onus that should fall on anyone to sort of call out sexual harassment.
Tom?
Yeah, I agree with Andrea that it doesn't fall to women to deal with this issue, because it's not a women-created issue. And I think it does actually start in schools. We need to educate young people about consent. And I know that Caroline Lucas has been pushing for a PSHE bill in Parliament to get better sexual education and education about relationships. I don't think that we should have women's only carriages, because it puts the responsibility onto women when it's the men that have responsibility, unfortunately.
Speaking just before the news, actually, at 11:30, one of the people I was talking to said, yes, you know what, in an ideal world, these are goals we need to work towards. But for right here and now, if I'm sending my 16-year-old out daughter onto public transport at 11 o'clock at night, if she's coming back from somewhere, I'd rather actually just right now know that she would be okay and she would be safe. Alexandra, is that something you would agree with?
I mean, I agree with what Nicky Morgan said this morning, which she's very uncomfortable with the idea of women's only carriages. I actually found it quite offensive, and it shows that Labour's not acting like it's in the 21st century. It's not the only time this week that Labour is, being sexist.
Sorry, can we not pacify?
Can I just finish what I'm saying? Sorry. I mean, Andy Berman said this week that Labour's not ready for a female leader. Well, we had a female leader in 1979. If now isn't the right time, when is?
Okay. And finally to you, Joe.
Well, I feel devastated for the young girls who have been through this, when they're travelling on trains. And I think it's a real culture that needs to be tackled actually in the schools, and inviting an environment where young people don't see this as, or people in general see this as an acceptable way to act. But the idea of introducing segregation is an appalling concept. We've managed to eradicate it around the world. Now, why try and reintroduce it? And I actually have to agree that they're making quite valid points, my Green and Labour colleagues here, because, it's not on the onus of the young people to be, young women to be stuck away in a carriage. It's archaic, it's abhorrent, and I genuinely hope that this was just one of those flash in the pans ideas that is going to die away just as quickly as Jeremy Corbyn's Labour will.
OK, well, let's look. We've got a minute and a bit left to go. So in 20 seconds each, please, let's talk about the Corbyn effect, I suppose. Let's talk about the Labour leadership. Andrea, who's the next leader of the Labour Party?
Yvette Cooper, definitely. She's providing a strong, credible alternative, which is something that Jeremy isn't doing. He's living in another world. And I think ideas like this kind of show that he's not really in touch with what the Labour Party needs right now. And I think Yvette is, proposing a really good, credible future, and also a feminist future. And I think, the Labour Party is ready for a woman who's got a great record on so many issues, and it's time to get her in power.
Alexandra.
I never like to try and predict election results, but whoever wins the leadership of the Labour, the outcome is going to be the same, which is more spending, more borrowing and more taxes.
Tom.
I think it's been really exciting, the leadership contest, and I just really hope that we can build a progressive left movement after the leadership contest.
And finally, Joe.
I'm going for Corbyn because I think he's the only one that gives a credible difference for the Labour Party.
OK, thank you all very much indeed. I'm sure it's going to spark a lot of debate online at BBC 5 Live, of course, is where you can get in touch. Andrea Campos, member of Young Labour, Alexandra Patterson from the National Chairman of the group Conservative Future, Tom Pashby, Campaigns Officer for the Young Greens, and Joe Jenkins, Chair of Young Independence, the youth section of UKIP. Thank you very much.